It began on a humid evening in May 1899. The newspapers barely mentioned it at first, just a short note about a house on Royal Street, abandoned for decades, yet somehow drawing neighbors' attention. What they failed to report was the chilling detail. Every night, lights flickered behind its boarded windows, shadows moving against the walls, though no one had lived there for years. Some pedestrians claimed they could hear faint whispers carried on the humid air, though no one would venture close enough to confirm. The cobblestones of Royal Street seemed to echo with unseen footsteps, and the nearby gas lamps flickered irregularly as if reacting to some unseen presence. Local historian Clara Dupree first documented the house in her private journal. She wrote of strange symbols etched into the shutters, patterns no carpenter could have made, and doors that seemed to creak open and close on their own. Clara's handwriting was meticulous, her notes precise, yet the tone of her entries carried an underlying tremor, an unease that grew with each visit. She described the way the shadows clung to corners and doorways, sometimes stretching unnaturally across the walls, as if the house itself were alive, observing intruders with a patient, deliberate gaze. On May 12th, she visited with a camera recently imported from Europe, eager to capture the house's neglected grandeur. When she developed the plates, she noticed a figure standing in the doorway, an older woman wearing garments long out of fashion, eyes dark and staring, though Clara had seen no one. The figure seemed almost translucent, yet unnervingly solid in its presence. Clara's diary notes record a cold chill that swept through the room when she looked at the developed image, as if the woman had followed her home from the negative. She questioned her own senses, wondering whether the camera had captured a trick of light or something sinister. Neighbors recalled the events differently. Mr. Henri Leblanc, a grocer whose shop stood 3 blocks away, swore he had seen children playing in the garden at dusk, though census records confirmed no family had lived there for decades. "They vanish," he whispered to a reporter in June, "and yet you feel them watching even after they're gone." The reporter noted that Henri's hands shook as he spoke, the late afternoon sunlight catching the fine lines of worry etched into his face. Other residents shared similar tales, footsteps echoing in empty halls, glimpses of figures in windows, doors that opened of their own accord. Some dismissed these stories as superstition, yet each account followed a pattern too precise to ignore. Archival police records reveal an unusual series of disappearances. In July 1899, a painter named Thomas Gerard entered the house to capture its architecture. He was never seen again. A search was conducted for weeks, yet no trace of him was found. Police reports described the house as locked from within, with windows secured, yet all attempts to force entry yielded nothing. Some officers reported feeling sudden cold spots and hearing whispers, yet official reports omitted these details. Weeks later, a local maid, Marie Benoit, reported hearing footsteps and whispering voices when she passed the street. Photographs she took of the house, supposedly empty, later showed fleeting shadows that resembled human forms, always at the windows, always just beyond clear recognition. Marie claimed she could feel eyes on her back as she walked away, and neighbors testified to strange lights reflecting off the boarded windows. By September, the house gained a notorious reputation. Local newspapers began reporting the Witch's House of Royal Street, a title first coined by journalist Samuel K. Dupree, no relation to Clara. He described hearing music from inside the empty halls, melodies of a haunting dirge, piano notes echoing though the instrument had long since rotted away. Residents claimed the air around the house carried a chill unnatural in the heat of the New Orleans autumn. Samuel's accounts included sketches of shadowy forms observed through broken windows, with annotations suggesting rapid movement that could not be attributed to natural wind or light. Clara returned in October with a team of amateur investigators. They documented strange occurrences, furniture rearranged overnight, inexplicable cold spots, and doors that opened and slammed without wind. Their notes mention a pervasive scent, musty yet metallic, reminiscent of decay and old rituals. One evening, they heard what seemed to be whispering, distinct phrases in French and Creole, though no one was present. Each night, the house seemed to change subtly, walls appearing closer or further, hallways longer than previously measured. The investigators became increasingly uneasy, some refusing to stay past midnight. One night, Clara's camera captured the most disturbing image, a translucent figure hovering near the ceiling, arms outstretched, mouth open in a silent scream. The negatives were smudged, but the shape remained visible, ethereal yet horrifyingly defined. Clara's journal recounts how the figure seemed to move when no one was looking, shifting its position between frames. When the team reviewed the photographs in the dim light of Clara's study, they swore they could hear the faint sound of sobbing from the prints themselves. Letters discovered in the local archives hint at the house's history. In 1845, a widow named Marguerite Lafay, accused of practicing dark rituals, was forced to leave the property. Before her departure, she allegedly cursed it, declaring that no one would ever live there in peace. Her handwriting, preserved in fragile ink and yellowed pages, carries an intensity that readers describe as unsettling. Her journal, preserved in a private collection, contains passages in French and Creole. They will come. They will watch. The house will remember what the world forgets. Clara noted in her diary that reading the entries felt like an intrusion into someone else's consciousness, a sense of eyes pressing into the back of her skull. Every line seemed to pulse with unspoken energy, and she often paused, wondering whether Marguerite had somehow imbued the house itself with a lingering presence. The investigators noted subtle details in their footage. In some photographs, the shadows of figures mirrored the architecture as if part of the building itself, stretching unnaturally, bending around corners. A narrow hallway, once measured at 6 feet, seemed to elongate between frames, and doors shifted slightly, as though the house itself rearranged itself according to some hidden logic. One night, a camera caught a shadow moving against the grain of sunlight, climbing walls where no one could stand. The team debated whether the phenomenon was an optical illusion, but repeated experiments yielded the same inexplicable results.
On November 3rd, a resident, Jean-Paul Arnaud, reported seeing a ladder leaning against a wall where none had been placed. Curious, he approached, but it dissolved into mist as he neared. He swore he felt a cold breath on his neck and heard faint whispering in Creole. Jean-Paul's neighbors corroborated that the air seemed unusually thick that evening, and that the street lamps along Royal Street dimmed as he walked. The city records indicate no inclement weather, yet he described raindrops forming on the latter as it evaporated before him. Even decades later, archives show curious continuity. Photographs taken in 1912, 1925, and 1930 depict the house unchanged, windows boarded, yet always inhabited by fleeting silhouettes. Some images show figures peering from cracks between boards, sometimes partially transparent, sometimes appearing solid. Researchers who studied these photographs noted inconsistencies, shadows cast in directions that defied natural light, figures bending impossibly around corners, and occasional double exposures that no contemporary camera could have produced accidentally. Locals claim that on certain nights, lanterns light themselves, music plays softly, and whispers of the long-gone Marguerite seem to seep into the streets. One resident, Lucien Moreau, reported seeing a pale hand pressed against the inside of a shuttered window. He described the fingers curling, as if trying to grip the boards. Another, a seamstress named Elodie Fontenot, said she heard a lullaby sung in a voice that was at once sorrowful and commanding, with words she understood only in fleeting moments of comprehension. The final entry in Clara Dupree's journal, dated December 1899, is brief and trembling. "I cannot leave. They are here. I see them in the corner of every eye. The house, it knows my name." She vanished shortly after. Her body never recovered. Clara's colleagues claimed they sensed a presence in the empty study long after she disappeared. Notebooks would shift overnight, ink seemed to pulse on the pages, and the air grew inexplicably cold, even in summer. The house remains, shuttered, empty, and yet perhaps watching. Some say that if you wander Royal Street at night, you may glimpse a faint light flicker behind the boards, a shadow that pauses as if observing. Occasionally, pedestrians report a chill passing over them, a feeling of eyes on their backs, and the faint sound of music when no one is near. And if you listen carefully, you might hear a voice whispering in French and Creole, "We remember." Witnesses who claim to have heard the voice insist it is not the wind, not echoes from nearby streets, but a coherent, intentional message. Some describe it as commanding, some as sorrowful, but all agree on one thing: it carries the weight of centuries, and the house itself seems to resonate with each utterance. No one has entered the house since 1930. The police, historians, and occasional thrill-seekers all report the same phenomenon: doors that open on their own, shadows that vanish when approached, and the unshakable feeling that the house is alive and remembering.
Scholars who attempted to analyze photographs, letters, and journals note inconsistencies. The shadows defy perspective, bend around corners, and occasional double exposures that no contemporary camera could have produced accidentally.